All right, let's jump into a deep dive today on Emperor Menelik II. I bet when you hear that name, you think Battle of Adwa. Am I right?
It's certainly what he's most famous for.
But hold on, everyone. We are going way beyond that battle today, and believe me, you're going to want to hear this. We're going to cover everything from infrastructure to nationalism to even the role of women in Menelik's court.
He's often remembered for that military victory, yeah. But Menelik II was so much more than that. I mean, he really helped shape the future of Ethiopia in a lot of ways. It's really interesting to think about the challenges he faced. I mean, he was leading a nation at a crossroads during, of all times, the Scramble for Africa.
The Scramble for Africa, not exactly a walk in the park, right? What kind of pressures was he actually up against?
Well, just picture it. You've got all these European powers racing to grab every piece of Africa they can. And they're dividing it up without even really thinking about the people and cultures that are already there. And Ethiopia, with its long and proud history, well, it was like a huge prize. Menelik had to be really careful. He had to balance internal power struggles with this threat of Europe always looming over him.
So it wasn't just about fending off outsiders. He had problems at home, too.
That's exactly right. I mean, Ethiopia back then wasn't one big happy family like we think of it today. There were all sorts of different groups, each with their own, loyalties and goals. And Menelik, he understood that if Ethiopia was going to survive, let alone do well, they needed something to bring them together, a shared sense of, identity and unity.
Okay, so we've got external pressures, we've got internal conflicts, and right in the middle of it all, there's Menelik trying to build a nation. And then, bam, the Battle of Adwa, 1896. Take me back to that moment.
The Italians, they thought they were going to just walk in and take over. They figured they had the better army, but they totally underestimated how determined the Ethiopians were, especially with Menelik leading them. And Adwa, that wasn't just a battle, it was a turning point. It was a huge rejection of colonialism. I mean, the whole world was watching.
This is a big deal, right? Not just some little local fight.
Oh, absolutely. Word of the Ethiopian victory spread like wildfire, all across Europe and even further. It really challenged the idea that Europe was always going to be on top. And it inspired resistance movements all over Africa. People saw that, hey, maybe the colonial powers weren't unbeatable after all.
It's funny because even if you don't know a lot about African history, the Battle of Adwa just, I don't know, it has this feeling to it.
Yeah.
Like, wow, they actually pulled it off.
And it wasn't just about military strategy, it was deeper than that. The Ethiopians were defending their home, their way of life, who they were. That's a powerful motivator.
It's clear that Menelik wasn't just about winning battles, though. It seems like he had this big vision for Ethiopia, a modern, unified nation. What were some of the things he did to make that happen?
Well, he knew that just having a strong military wasn't enough. You had to create a sense of shared purpose, a national identity. So he poured resources into infrastructure, building roads and railways, even telegraph lines to connect the different parts of Ethiopia.
So not just conquering territory, but connecting it. Like he was weaving together a nation.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It wasn't just about physical connections, though. He was trying to create a sense of shared destiny, break down the things that had kept people apart for so long.
It's amazing to think about how building roads and railways could actually help bring people together. Was that a common strategy for building nations back then?
It was becoming more and more important as countries started modernizing and industrializing. But Menelik, he had his own unique challenges. He was trying to unify this huge and diverse empire, and at the same time, he had to keep Europe at bay.
It sounds like he had his work cut out for him, for sure. But, this brings up something I've been thinking about. Menelik was clearly into modernizing his army. How did he go about that?
Well, he was very practical, that's for sure. He knew that to protect Ethiopia, he had to adapt. So, he sent diplomats to Europe to study their military techniques. He even started importing modern weapons.
So he wasn't afraid to learn from others?
No, not at all. But he was smart about it. He didn't just throw out all the traditional Ethiopian military practices. He combined them with the new ideas he got from Europe.
So a mix of old and new. That's pretty forward thinking, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It was a tough balancing act, but it really worked. This blend of traditional tactics and modern weapons, it was one of the biggest reasons they won at Adwa.
It seems like Menelik was a master at adapting and innovating. But what really fascinates me? The role of women in his court. I've read that they weren't just there for show. They were really involved. Advisors, influencers, the whole 9 yards. Tell me more about that.
That's one of the most interesting things about Menelik's reign. A lot of people don't know about it. He had several powerful women in his inner circle. Most importantly, his wife, Empress Tetu Batul.
Empress Tetu. Now, there's a woman I'd like to know more about. Sounds like she was much more than just the emperor's wife.
Oh, you can say that again. She was known for being really smart, politically savvy, and she definitely had a mind of her own. Menelik trusted her advice. And you know what? She even went with him on military campaigns sometimes.
No way, that's not exactly what you picture when you think of an empress.
It really challenges our expectations, right? But, Empress Tetu wasn't an exception. There were other powerful women in Menelik's court, too. Women who helped shape policy, ran things, even settled disputes.
It makes you wonder how much of this was because of Ethiopian culture and how much was just Menelik himself.
Now, that is a fascinating question. It really gets at the heart of Menelik's rule. I mean, Ethiopia was definitely a patriarchal society. But at the same time, they also had this history of strong women in leadership roles, especially within their own communities. And it seems like Menelik saw the value in that and may have even encouraged it.
So having all these women involved, was that unique to Ethiopia? Or were there other African kingdoms that were doing the same kind of thing?
That's a really good question. You definitely had some powerful women in other African societies too, but I'd say that Menelik really stood out, even compared to his own time. Some people think it was a strategy, a way to solidify his power base, but others think he genuinely believed that women were just as capable.
Interesting. Maybe it was a little both. It makes me think about the challenges leaders have today with trying to get more equality for women. It's tough to find that balance between what the culture is used to and what's actually fair.
I agree. And looking back at Menelik, it shows us that progress doesn't always move in a straight line, There are bumps along the way. His reign, with all that traditional stuff, but then also some progressive ideas, well, it reminds us that change is complicated, and it takes time.
Let's go back to Adwa for a sec. We talked about the big global impact, but what about the battle itself? What helped the Ethiopians win?
Well, a couple things. One, they knew the land like the back of their hands. Two, they were super motivated. And three, they had this really cool mix of old school tactics and new weapons, like they used guerrilla warfare, sneaking up on the Italians and messing with their supplies. Plus, they had a strong cavalry, which was a big help towards the end.
And even though he had all those new weapons from Europe, Menelik didn't ditch the traditional fighting methods.
No, he didn't. In fact, he used them together really well. You see, Ethiopian warriors were known for being really good with swords and spears, and they used those right alongside rifles and cannons. It threw the Italians off completely. They were expecting a more straightforward fight.
It's like Menelik was playing to Ethiopia's strengths, while also knowing they had to move forward with the times.
Exactly. But it wasn't just about how they fought, it was also about what it meant. Using those traditional ways of fighting, it showed everyone how much pride they had in their culture and their country, and that motivated his troops like crazy. Plus, it probably freaked out the Italians a bit too.
So it was like a victory on multiple levels then, huh? Military, but also cultural and even psychological.
That's it. Adwa sent a clear message. Ethiopia wasn't going to be just another colony. It was a strong, independent nation, and they were ready to protect that.
Now, we've talked a bit about this already, but I want to go deeper into Menelik's efforts to modernize Ethiopia. What were some of the main areas he focused on?
Well, he knew that for Ethiopia to be successful in the modern world, it needed a strong base. So infrastructure was huge. He spent a lot of money building roads and railways to connect different parts of the country, which was great for trade too. He also set up a postal system and brought in the telegraph, which connected Ethiopia to the rest of the world.
Sounds like he had a very practical approach to modernization. Not just like, oh, that's a cool European idea, let's do it, but really thinking about what would help Ethiopia specifically.
He was very strategic, definitely. He didn't just copy what Europe was doing, he adjusted things to fit Ethiopia. For example, in Ethiopia, land was traditionally owned by the community, not by individuals like in Europe. So Menelik, he found ways to modernize the economy without changing that system.
That's a perfect example of how he blended tradition and progress. A real theme in his leadership, it seems.
You got it. He was practical, always trying to make Ethiopia stronger without losing its unique culture.
But modernizing, that couldn't have been easy, right? I imagine some people push back against the changes, both inside and outside of Ethiopia.
Oh, for sure. Change is never easy, especially when you're messing with traditions and who's got the power. There were definitely groups in Ethiopia who weren't happy with what Menelik was doing. They saw it as a threat. And of course, European powers weren't thrilled to see Ethiopia getting stronger.
It shows how progress often comes with a cost, right? Even the most forward-thinking leaders face opposition.
Exactly. Menelik's time as leader had its ups and downs, which, when you think about it, is true for anyone in a leadership role.
Now, we've touched on the women in Menelik's court, but I'd love to hear more about Empress Taitu. How much influence did she really have over his decisions?
Oh, she was a force, that's for sure. Sharp as a tack and not afraid to speak her mind. She wasn't just sitting there looking pretty, she was involved in political debates, giving strategic advice, especially when it came to dealing with other countries, negotiating treaties, building relationships, that kind of thing.
So, like a diplomat in her own right. Did she have any part in what led up to the Battle of Adwa?
Absolutely. She was all about Ethiopian independence. And she was key in getting people to rally against the Italians. She even went to the battlefield with Menelik, helping with supplies and keeping the troops' spirits up.
Wow, that's amazing. I wonder what the Italians thought of her. They must have been a little intimidated.
Oh, I'm sure they were. There are stories about Italian officials being totally thrown off by how smart and assertive she was. They were used to dealing with men, and here comes this woman with all this power and influence.
She must have made quite an impression, not just in Ethiopia, but around the world too.
It definitely makes you rethink what you thought you knew about women back then, right? Empress Taitu was a pioneer. She broke the mold.
And she wasn't the only one. We've talked about other women in Menelik's court who had important roles. What do you think it was about Menelik that made him so open to women being involved?
You know, historians are still debating that. Some say he was just being practical. He saw how talented these women were, and he knew they could help him lead. Others think it was something deeper, like he genuinely respected women, maybe because of how he was raised or the traditions of some groups in Ethiopia.
It's interesting how it could be all those things mixed together. Personal beliefs, cultural norms, and good old-fashioned politics. It shows how complicated leadership really is.
For sure. And when you're looking back at historical figures, you got to be careful not to oversimplify things. Menelik, just like anyone else, was shaped by his time and his own experiences. His legacy, it's like a tapestry made up of all these different threads, some good, some not so good. But they all make up the story of who he was.
It's clear that Menelik was an amazing leader. He brought Ethiopia together, fought off colonialism, and left a mark that's still talked about today. But like with any historical figure, there are some things that are, well, a bit more controversial.
That's very true. We focus a lot on his achievements, but we also need to talk about the criticisms. Some historians say that the way he unified Ethiopia wasn't always peaceful. He used force to put down certain groups and take control.
So bringing everyone together wasn't always done in a nice way.
Sadly, no. There were times when Menelik's armies were pretty brutal, especially in the south and east. People were hurt, driven from their homes, and because of that, some question whether he was really a unifier or more of a conqueror.
It's a reminder that even when you're trying to do something good, like build a nation, there can be unintended bad consequences. And it's important to listen to everyone, even those whose voices aren't always heard.
Absolutely. When you're studying history, you have to be critical. Look at all the evidence and be open to different points of view. Menelik's legacy is complex. It's got both good and the bad. And it's up to us to try to understand all of that.
It's kind of wild how someone can do so much good. I mean, unifying a country, fighting off colonialism, but still have people questioning them. History's never straightforward, is it?
Nope, not usually.
Yeah.
It shows us that when you're leading a whole country, the decisions aren't always so clear-cut. There's always give and take. And those tough choices can have consequences that last for years. We can admire what Menelik did, but we can't ignore the more difficult parts of what he left behind.
It's like those history books that make people out to be all good or all bad. It just doesn't feel real, does it?
Yeah, it's way too simplistic, and it's something we should keep in mind, not just when we're thinking about history, but in our lives too. People are complicated. To really get why they do things, the effect they have, we can't just slap a label on them.
That's one of the things that makes doing these deep dives so interesting. It's not just about facts and dates, it's about getting a sense of the whole person and the time they lived in.
Totally. And Menelik's a really good example because his reign was such a crazy time of change. The world was changing fast, and he had to deal with all that, plus the problems within Ethiopia, plus the threat from Europe, and somehow he had to find a way forward for Ethiopia.
What do you think is his most important legacy out of everything we've talked about? What's he known for in Ethiopia today?
Well, it's complicated, like we've been saying. He's definitely remembered for those military wins, especially Adwa. It's still a huge symbol of Ethiopia, standing strong and being independent. But he's also remembered for modernizing the country, bringing it together, setting the stage for the Ethiopia we see today.
So a little bit of everything then. A leader who did some great stuff, but also made some choices that people still debate.
That's about right, I think. It's about looking at the whole picture. the good and the bad, celebrating his achievements while understanding that there were some downsides too.
Makes you wonder what Menelik would think. If he could see Ethiopia today, would he be proud of how far it's come? Or bummed about some of the problems that are still around?
That's an interesting thought, isn't it? I bet he'd be both proud and maybe a little taken aback by how things have turned out. He'd probably love seeing that Ethiopia is still independent and a major force in Africa. But I think he'd also be worried about the ethnic and political divisions that are still causing trouble.
Shows how building a nation is never really over, right? Every generation has its own issues to work out. Trying to find that balance between holding on to tradition and moving forward, being united, but also embracing all the different groups.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the things that shape our world today and will continue to shape it in the future. Menelik's story, with all the ups and downs, teaches us about the tough job of being a leader, how power works, and that never-ending search for what it means to be a nation.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've all learned a ton about Emperor Menelik II, from his wins on the battlefield to his efforts to make Ethiopia modern to the complicated legacy he left behind. What a journey. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Just to say it again, history is never black and white. It's full of gray areas and people who are shaped by their times but also change things themselves. Menelik was one of those people, a leader whose story makes you think and keeps the conversation going.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of Emperor Menelik II. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. And hey, keep that curiosity alive. Keep digging deeper into history. We'll catch you next time.